Peter Bragg is the Associate Professor of Behaviour Works at Monash Universities. Peter, how much of burnout is actually connected to our work?
Hi, Rochelle. I mean, burnout by definition, the World Health Organization definition talks about it as a workplace syndrome, and certainly a lot of the research is centred in workplace burnout. But obviously, people in life can be burnt out by a number of things. If you're a parent of young children, there's certainly the symptoms of burnout, which are feelings of exhaustion and effects on your performance are generalisable beyond workplaces. But most of the research has focused on burnout as a workplace phenomenon.
And it's interesting looking at our text line, Peter, of the different industries where people are either talking about experience or complaining about their history of burning out in workplaces. We're looking at health, we're looking at law, we're looking at accountancy. Helen was talking about the corporate world she was working in as well. Is there something unique about these environments that are so high pressure they lead to more burnout?
Well, certainly the research has centred a lot on healthcare workers because they're frontline workers and they're always on, they're 24/7. Some other shift working industries like mining, for example, there's a little bit of research in the extractive industries. But I guess, as I've been listening to your calls, any workplace that has an intensity that ramps up to a level where you're working long hours, you might be under pressure to deliver certain things. Obviously, that is an environment where burnout can exist, but the predominant literature has really been around healthcare workers and to a lesser extent shift working industries and other sort of 24/7 industries.
It's interesting. There's a text here from Stephen in Brunswick that says, yes, burnout has been classified as an occupational phenomenon, not a medical condition by the World Health Organization. Should it be classified as a medical condition, do you think?
Well, I think the most important thing for individuals, if you're feeling the symptoms of burnout, like exhaustion, feeling detached from things, that you're not quite on top of whatever you're doing, the main thing is to think about how you might be able to address those issues. And certainly the research has shown that some of the individually focused interventions like mindfulness, learning about what burnout is, individual psychological therapies and exercise, which most people would associate with things that can improve your quality of life, seem to be effective in managing burnout. So I think, academics like me, we argue about definitions all the time, but the bottom line for listeners is probably, if you feel burnt out, if you feel exhausted, if you feel like you're not coping, you should think about, how you might be able to get some help.
Yeah, but if I was working in the healthcare industry and I went to my boss saying I'm feeling really burnt out and they sent me a link to some yoga videos, I think I'd be quite frustrated with that, wouldn't I?
Well, it's interesting, Warwick, because, certainly, I think in research, so we look for research for a living, so we found lots of reviews about burnout management, and it's important to say there's been a lot of research into burnout. It's been happening for at least 20 years. There's been special questionnaires developed by academics to measure burnout, to see what works, and there's a lot of reviews. So there's a lot of people researching how to solve burnout. I think the thing is that the individual therapies are pretty easy, relatively easy to study, but there's certainly evidence that organisationally focused or system level interventions are absolutely critical, and the most studied example is actually around healthcare workers, which is duty hour limitation policies for doctors, so making them not have crazy shifts.
But that's just impossible at the moment. I mean, we're hearing that people are annual leave is being cancelled, they're being called back not only from annual leave but from retirement, and it's working around the clock. So this is, I guess, we're in a different world now, Peter, in that it's easy to study, but to put into practice at the moment is impossible.
Well, it's been overlaid by a number of other things. So then we have to think about, I think Diana, your caller, was talking about how do we treat each other at work? What's our workplace culture like? Do we feel part of a team? Do we demonstrate empathy and compassion? So there are a few other things that are like team building activities, broadly described, that have been shown in research to have some effect on burnout. But obviously in health, I think there's a particularly acute problem at the moment where there's just not the workforce to be able to put those sort of duty hour limitations in place, which were actually instigated in the US in about 2003. So many years ago, emergency workers working around the clock were getting burned out because they just had way too long shifts, and they were completely exhausted and obviously stressed by the work that they were exposed to.
And just on the where we're at the moment and what research is saying, Peter Braggs with you, Associate Professor at Behaviour Works at Monash University. This text here, Peter says, research coming out on the Great Resignation shows it's toxic workplace culture driving it, plus inauthentic positive management speak. People are making different choices post-COVID to no longer put up with it. Can you speak to that research? Is that actual evidence?
No, well, not from a research perspective, but I think what it does track to, which has been researched, is what I was just talking about, which is the workplace culture. And if we think about things like how depression has been managed over the years, so 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was that kind of, just cheer up and get over it. And as we've increased our understanding of actually it's not as simple as that, I think that nuance probably hasn't flowed through to burnout. But what we can say from research is that the system level factors, the organisational factors matter. So whether you feel part of a team, whether you're respected, whether you're spoken to and you're demonstrating empathy and compassion to each other, and other things like blended working from home, changes to work hours, which my colleague Denise Goodwin studied, and I think she was on the Conversation Hour a while ago, talking about how one workplace had actually changed the way that they work fundamentally around saying it's okay to work from home, and that's another thing that's happening with COVID.
And just on that, I suppose, I'm a journalist by trade, and I love that now government departments and a lot of large corporates love an internal survey to check on how their staff are going. I love getting my hands on it if anyone's listening and likes to pass it on. But usually, and from people I've spoken to, and obviously this is secondhand, but the response from a lot of management is to have a day where everyone comes and talks to the workers, but it's so heavily managed, so no one's allowed to actually speak out in any sort of public way about what their frustrations or what's leading to the burnout in staff. Everyone just gets to put a few words on what positive changes they want to make on butcher paper or on the whiteboard, right? Is it this sort of situation that's frustrating more people to think about their job choices at the moment?
Well, I think I'm not aware of research in that particular space, but I think that the principle of asking people how you feel, whether it's at a workplace or an individual level, is you have to have a way of following through and actually managing the responses that is meaningful and sustainable. And
so is that where the failure is happening at the moment?
Well, possibly. I mean, I think when we talk about the research into workplace culture and these things that might be long-term, like changing your work habits, they're not the team building day where you all feel good for a little while, or maybe you don't even feel good for a little while. They're actually fundamental system-level changes in the way that we work, and overlaid on top of that is the attitude to the way we work. So, I think they're the things that really are meaningful in the long term, because if you think about burnout, it's a long-term thing. It's not just, you had a bad week and everyone has a nice lunch and then you feel better again. I mean, there are fundamental properties of work, particularly in those industries that we mentioned, that mean that you have to manage this on an ongoing basis. You can't just sort of do a quick fix.
And it has been, we're heading close to 3 years now. Peter Bragg, as always, thanks so much for your time and your insights.
Absolute pleasure. Take care.